Hello and welcome. This is Little Wave at Your Stars Within. As promised, I am making a video about the upcoming Mercury Retrograde that is just about to begin. It's going to start on June the 18th of 2020, and it begins retrograding at 14 degrees Cancer. Now let's remember that means Mercury came across the zodiac from as far back as it's going to go, right? So let's say 5 degrees Cancer all the way to 14 degrees Cancer before it went retrograde. So we've actually already been in the shadow period, which is Mercury going through those degrees before it retrogrades. Then on June 18th, it's going to retrograde at 14 degrees Cancer. It's going to go all the way back to 5 degrees Cancer. And it's going to get to that point where it stations to go direct again on July the 12th. So the retrograde portion is over as of July the 12th. But then the shadow period on the other end, as it goes forward, but makes its way back to 14 degrees. So it's not out of shadow until July 27. So it's done retrograding at July 12th, but I think that we'll still see some effects until July 27. So just as a reminder, there's nothing to be afraid of with Mercury retrogrades or any of the retrogrades. Retrogrades take energy and they bring it internal. It's for reflection, right? It's an opportunity to do all the relax, reflect, okay? Sometimes we have to redo. Sometimes there will be paperwork or communications that get a little mixed up. It's not a time to go forward, especially not with new projects. I wouldn't list my house or try to sell my house in retrograde, or buy a house in retrograde for that matter. Too much paperwork. So it's this internal reflective period. It's great for meditation. It's great for creativity. It's great for the arts. And so when Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year, so we go through this period multiple times in a year, and it's an opportunity for the nervous system to rest, for us to come within ourselves and kind of look at the direction that we've taken, make sure that it's the directions that we want to continue in. And so then the areas of life represented by Mercury will be the areas of life that it's affecting you. So depending on the planet, right? So in this case, Mercury. And we're going to say, okay, so Mercury has to do with communication. It has to do with thinking process, thought patterns. And it also has to do with technology. So it's a good opportunity and recommendation to back up your files. Anything technological, to kind of have a backup. Things kind of go on the fritz sometimes. Sometimes they re-correct themselves. Then you want to look at what house, and if this Mercury retrograde is going to touch any other planets or points in your chart. So I do have a previous video that I made to help you with this. So you want to look at your chart and you want to look at where between 5 and 14 degrees of Cancer is. That might be in just one house, or it might span 2 houses. Remember, Cancer looks like the 69 symbol. And so you're going to look for that in your chart, and you're going to look at the degrees there. It's going to be a short portion of it, close to the beginning is where 5 degrees is, to about midway is about 14 degrees. Okay? And just see, do you have any planets or points? Do you have anything else hanging out there? You can also look across and see if you have anything between 5 and 14 degrees in Capricorn, because that would mean that this Mercury retrograde is going to opposite that. And then if you want to look if there's any squares to it, you want to look at Aries and Libra between 5 and 14 degrees. I would say the house that the Mercury retrograde itself is going to happen in is Lunar. The house that Mercury retrograde is going to happen in is the house that it will affect you the most, or the area of life it will affect you the most. So even if you don't have planets or points, Lunar, come. Even if you don't have planets or points at those spots, it's still going to affect you in the area of life that the house represents. I do have the house series to help you understand the different houses. I know it's a lot to take in. So I want to remind you that Venus is currently retrograde. We actually have a lot of planets in retrograde right now. Venus is currently in retrograde. She's been in retrograde for a bit. She's almost done. She is going to be done on June 25th. So very shortly after Mercury goes retrograde, Venus comes out of her retrograde. However, she's not out of her shadow period until July 29. So it's really the end of July, right? Like the 30th, 31st, 1st of August that we're really out of those shadow period of the more personal planet retrogrades. Now we have less personal, right? More transpersonal planets that affect all of us. They're very slow moving, so they can affect generations at a time. That have been in retrograde for a while as well. You've probably seen the memes. Oh, it's June, we got 6 planets in retrograde. We do. Jupiter's been in retrograde since May. Saturn's been in retrograde since May. Neptune is going into retrograde June 23rd. So there'll be 2 days there. We have 6 planets in retrograde. Pluto went into retrograde in April, and Uranus will go into retrograde in August. Those are all longer planets that take longer to affect us. And then we'll see a Mars retrograde in September, and then some of those longer planets start coming out of retrograde, October, November. So we really have a heavy retrograde year. This is a time as a whole, individually and as a collective, that we're looking back, that we're reflecting, and we're deciding what does and doesn't work for us, what needs to be changed. So in this case, let's just focus on the Mercury retrograde. This is in Cancer. Cancer is the mother, the moon, the childhood, the home, ancestral patterns. Mercury is communication and thinking process. So I'm going to suggest that some of the things that are going to come up have to do with old ways of thinking, old ways of viewing things, especially the things that have been inherited from your family, generationally, ancestrally. Maybe there's negative thinking patterns or ways of putting yourself down that you didn't even notice that you do. Maybe your mom always did it, and so you just inherited it, and you didn't realize that your thinking pattern was really negative towards yourself. Or maybe you didn't realize that your communication pattern was very blaming, right? Something like that. With Cancer, Cancer's known for its passive-aggressive tendency. I don't actually like to look at Cancer as passive-aggressive. That's not how I experience it. We have to remember it's the crab. And if you've ever seen a crab go towards a goal, it's not direct like an Aries, right? That's why Aries and Cancer square. It's kind of goes over here and then maybe back and then over here. And then, it kind of takes this circuitous route to get to its goal. And that's how I think Cancer energy often manifests. So you might have thinking processes or communication processes that you just don't realize, right? Because Cancer can be a little bit funny that way. We just don't realize we've inherited it. And so also the process of realization might be a little sideways. The process of change might be a little sideways, meaning that we kind of go in and out. We don't go directly at the goal. So you might have that thought, let's say it's a negative self-thought, and then you might have to say, oh, there's my mom in my head. And you might have to say, all right, I'm going to try to be nice to myself. And then the next time it might not work out that way. And you might think, oh, but it's true. And then the time after that, you might try again. So it can be a real back and forth process with Cancer. It's also a water sign, so I want you to pay attention to your feelings. Even though this is Mercury and it's our thoughts, I still think it's going to come through from the feeling level, the attachment level. Cancer used to be the turtle, and I also think that's helpful to think about. Both Cancer or turtle and crab, they both have shells. So really underneath that shell is this mushy center that they feel the need to guard and protect, but that guarding and protecting is really external. It's something not natural to Cancer, right? Their true actual being, their true self, is really quite mushy and squishy and sweet. It's the ultimate nurturer. But remember, you know, it's like, can also be smother mother, right? Like I want to hug you and squeeze you and hold you forever, right? And there's no breathing room. So when we think about Mercury in Cancer, we want to look at the way that we form and maintain attachments as well. We want to think about maybe the type of attachments that we've had in our families. You know, if you're not familiar with attachment theory and psychology, you know, you might want to look up like secure attachments, anxious attachments, avoidant attachments. Learning about your attachment style might help to illuminate a lot of relationship patterns. And as I always say, I don't think that these things happen in a vacuum, right? This is all happening in, I want to say in harmony, or like in an orchestra. So this Mercury retrograde is happening at the heels of the Venus retrograde. And so maybe we come to understand something about our relationships and our relationship patterns in this Venus retrograde. And now we're going to take a deeper look at where they come from. What are those thought and communication patterns, those attachment patterns from our families of origin that have then developed into those patterns in relationships that maybe you've become more aware of in Venus retrograde? Meanwhile, we have at the global and consciousness level this really big transformation that's happening, especially here in the US. You know, we have this recent eclipse was on the US ascendant. We have a Pluto return. We all have the Pluto-Saturn conjunction going on. So we're going through big change and transformation and going through that upheaval of old beliefs, of old thought patterns, communication patterns, the history of us as a people on this land, and how we've treated others. And we're having to really dig into that at many levels, at a transformative level, at an understanding level, at a need for radical change, at a karmic level with Saturn. So I think it's really important to recognize that this process, whether it's happening in the microcosm of you and your attachments and your relationships, understanding that it's also happening on these larger, more macro levels of our societal histories and patterns and ways of interacting in relationship. Okay, one other thing I do want to point out is that we have a full moon on July the 5th of 2020. And that full moon is going to be at 13 Capricorn, right? Because the full moon, the sun and the moon are opposite. So 13 Capricorn is the moon because the sun will be at 13 Cancer. So this is also really activating of this Mercury retrograde. So full moon is when things really come to our awareness, right? The moon pulls the water upward. And so I would imagine that with this full moon, you'll fully understand what this Mercury retrograde is about for you. So pay attention to what comes up around that time because it will help you to work with that energy. It's also interesting to note that Venus retrograde back to 5 degrees Gemini. Mercury retrograded back to 5 degrees Cancer, or will, 5 degrees Cancer. And then the full moon is on July 5th. So when I see these repetition of numbers, I think that numerology is speaking to us. And fives, you know, fives can be in astrology like the 5th house, the fun and the joy and the playfulness, activities and friends. But in the numerology and in the tarot, 5 can be the upheaval. It can be the chaos, right? Like a first leg of work is done, the 1 through 4, but we've rested on the 4. And then the chaos kind of resurfaces that pulls us into the next level of learning, the next level of being. So you might be kind of going around that spiral now for maybe a second time. You might have gotten some awareness of what this is about and thought that you made some changes, like, gee, didn't I already deal with this? You did, and good job, and don't take that away from yourself. But there's another round, right? Because we just really return to the same issues at deeper and deeper levels. right? I often tell my clients, the good news is you don't have a million issues. You only have a handful of them. The bad news is they're yours, and you're gonna get better with them, and you're gonna grow through them. But these are the patterns, or the cyclical spiral of your life and what you're here to learn about and work out. So this might feel like a second chaotic upheaval of what you thought you just dealt with. Maybe you thought that you resolved something in a relationship and it gets re-triggered. Or you start to see now that that relationship issue really stems from issues from your family, and now you're having big emotional, upheaval around the more core family of origin issues. That's really where those relationship patterns started. So at a societal level, I think this is also telling us that we just had a lot of protests, right? We went from Corona, we went to protests. It feels like change is happening and momentum is building. And then this 5. Is that going to be a sense of chaos? Or like, what did we achieve? Or is this going to be pushing us to what is the next level of resistance, right? Maybe this is about now getting the proper people in offices to make policy change, right? What is that next layer? How's life? Life is going to show us. I'm just taking guesses, right? Life is going to unfold for us the many possibilities that this energy can take. And you can say, gee, which of these possibilities do I want to participate in? What are the ones that are in my highest good? How can I open myself to the joy, to the presence, to the learning of this moment, right? Because then I can have the ways of expressing this energy that help me to flow and to stay in flow. So this full moon, I think, is going to bring up the next level of chaos. We're going to find out what is the next leg of this journey about. Good job on the first leg. Don't let that chaos make us think that we didn't achieve something. We did, and it was successful. Now, welcome to round 2, right? Next level up. So I hope that that's helpful. I hope that you're able to take a look at your chart and see where this is and see if it's affecting anything. You can always Google those types of things once you know, Mercury conjunct my Mars or my Venus, Mercury retrograde opposite moon, whatever it's falling for you. If you would like to do a brief reading, I'm offering some retrograde readings at a reduced rate just to help people get a sense of where these things are happening in these charts. So you're welcome to send me a message or check out my site and take it from there. I wish you well. I hope this makes sense and that you're able to navigate your chart. Thank you.